our ratepayers. Similar to what we did in 2015. Now, of course, 2015, we were able to do it in person. These are different times. Very, very happy that we have a large participation list. And we're going to get on with it. Please mute your devices, but your phones. But at any rate, please hold your comments and questions for agenda item number 6. And there's a lot to talk about, so we're going to get to the experts. And Gary Keeneland, would you please start?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I'm going to try to share my screen. Is that okay, Cindy?
Yeah, you should be able to share. If not, I can give you.
It says I'm disabled.
Okay, let me see. Go ahead, Gary. Oh wait, I think I did the wrong Gary. That's why. Hold on. Okay, Gary, you should be able to.
Okay.
Share.
Okay, can we see that? Oh. We see.
Yeah, there it goes.
It's about to. Hold on. There we
Yes.
go. Okay, so we've got a presentation here. I'm going to start off and present some information about current conditions, water quality conditions, drought conditions, etc. And then Kevin's going to have him turn it over to Kevin here later in the presentation. So we're going to talk about where we are hydrologically this year as compared to other years. Talk about some of the drought-related actions that have taken place in the state, and then we'll get into the contract, the North Delta contract. And I'm going to talk about some of that and turn it over to Kevin at that point. So this chart shows the 8-station Northern Sierra precipitation. So it's the sum of the precipitation at 8 stations. This gives us a whole selection of different years. The blue mass is the average. The big blue blob, if you will, is the average from 1966 to 2015. The thing I want to highlight is here we are in 2021, currently at about 23.2 inches. You can see how this compares with other dry years. 2014 or water year 2015 was 37.2 at the end of the year. 1977, we're drier than 1970, or a little bit wetter than 1977 so far this year. This is another way. This bar chart shows the Four River Basin Index, which is the sum of the full natural or unimpaired inflow or flow in the Sacramento River, the Feather River, and the Yuba River and the American River. And this is ranked from the driest year on the left all the way up to the wettest year on the far right. And you'll see that 2021 is the 4th bar from the left, or 4th driest thus far. And what we have for 2021, since we're not through the water year, which ends at the end of September, this is the actual unimpaired flows through July, and then the forecasted flow for August and September. But like I say, it shows that we're the 4th driest. Interesting, if you look at the far right, only 4 years ago, 2017 was the wettest year when we look at this index. These are the current reservoir conditions. This is as of last Friday, I think, is when this was done. Things haven't changed much. You can see Lake Shasta is at 29% of capacity. Oroville is at 23% of capacity. I should point out here that the 29% at Shasta, there's next to that, there's a red number that says 43%. Those red numbers are the percent of average for this time of year. The 29%, the number on the left, is the percent of capacity of the various reservoirs. You can see Oroville's at 23%, Folsom's at 24%. So pretty low in all the reservoirs. This is another graphic and concentrating on Oroville because it's the State Water Project's reservoir. You can see again the big blue mass is the average, the historical average reservoir storage for various times of the year. We've got 1970, 76, 77, which is kind of the reddish line in the middle. There's water year 2014, which is 2013, 14, and 14, 15. And then this year, what I would point out here is looking at this the dark line, which is this year's storage. As of last Friday, storage in Oroville was 820,000 acre feet, which is lower than we saw in 1977, which was the driest year on record. You can see if you look at the left, we started off this year a little lower than 1977. And I would also, and now we are still lower as we come through toward the end of the year. I would point out that storage as of yesterday is down to 806,000 acre feet. So this plot again was printed on Friday, but as of today we're at 806,000 acre feet. Point of reference, in 1977 we ended the year at 905,000 acre feet. Water supply allocations, State Water Project allocations on the Feather River. There's a group of Feather River settlement contracts or Feather River settlement agreements that they are at 50% of their supplies under their agreements. State Water Project allocations to the state water contractors are 0. On the federal side, the Central Valley Project allocations, the Sacramento River settlement contractors, as well as the San Joaquin River Exchange contractors, per those contracts, this year has been determined Shasta critical, and therefore those contractors are at 75% of their contract supplies. Discretionary contracts, which are the non-settlement agreements or non-settlement contractors on the federal side, ag allocations are currently at 0, and M&I, both north and south of the Delta, are at 25% of their contract allocations. Drought-related actions. There's a lot of words on this slide, but this is kind of a chronology of what we've seen in regard to drought-related actions this year. Back in March on the 22nd, the Water Board sent out warning notices to water right holders to prepare for drought impacts. On April 29th, the State Water Board Division of Water Rights issued curtailments to those post-1914 water rights permits and licenses that contain Term 91. Term 91 is a standard permit term that's contained in all of the water rights issued by the State Water Board, with priority dates beginning in about 1967. And there's specific criteria that says when these conditions exist, it has to do with the delta being in balance, and the projects are releasing stored project water to meet in-basin demands. When both of those conditions exist, those water rights with Term 91 are curtailed, and you cannot divert water under those rights.
Hey, Gary, sorry to interrupt. I got a note that Ramsey Croft, who's a water attorney that I know, is trying to get into the meeting. Cindy, could you?
Yeah, Gary, I'm gonna, for whatever reason, it gave you host rights, not, and I think that's what's wrong. Hold on 1 second. I'm gonna reclaim host and it may pause
Okay.
your thing. Let's see here.
Okay.
All right.
Pause, please.
Here. Oh, yeah. Okay, we have a bunch of people coming in. Okay. Sorry about that. For those of you just joined, sorry about that. If you guys can, I'm gonna mute you. All right, Gary. You'll probably need to unmute yourself, Gary. Sorry.
There, am I back?
Yeah, you're back. Sorry about that.
Okay. All right. Let's see, April 29th, we talked about the term 91 curtailment issued by the Water Board. On May 10th, the governor issued his drought proclamation, emergency drought proclamation, or drought emergency proclamation, pardon me. On June 1st, the State Water Board issued an order approving a temporary urgency change petition, which was filed by the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. And what that TUCP did is as far as things that are important to North Delta, the Water Board allowed a reduction in the Delta outflow requirement that is contained in decision 1641, D1641. It also, the TUCP also allowed the projects to meet, there's a salinity criteria or salinity requirement under D1641 that's required to be met in the Sacramento River at Emmeton. The TUCP allowed the projects to move that compliance location for that requirement from Emmeton upstream to 3 Mile Slough. And we'll talk about that again in a minute because 3 Mile Slough is the compliance location under the North Delta contract. June 15th, the Water Board issued some notices of water availability for the Delta watershed. And I believe that included all of the San Joaquin and Sacramento River watersheds as well as the Delta. It was a notice of unavailability. It was notifying folks that are water right holders that the Water Board had determined they believed there was not sufficient water to meet water rights within the Delta. It was not, however, a curtailment at that time. On August 3rd, the State Water Board adopted an emergency regulation which authorized the Deputy Director of the Division of Water Rights to issue curtailment notices. And on Monday, August 20th, curtailment orders were issued to water rights holders in the Delta watershed. Those curtailments for August includes all post-1914 appropriated for water rights in the Delta watershed. And that includes the Sacramento River, the legal Delta, and the San Joaquin River watershed. Also curtailed all pre-1914 water right claims in the San Joaquin River watershed. Pre-1914 water right claims in the Sacramento watershed, Sacramento River watershed, and legal Delta with priority dates of 1983 or later. And there were some other curtailments that are applicable to specific tributaries or sub watersheds within those areas.
Gary?
Yes.
It's Melinda, sorry. Sorry about that. I just want to let people know that the Delta Water Master, Michael George, will be going into more detail regarding your little summary there as well, so.
Okay. Okay, so that's moving on. Now we can talk about the North Delta contract, the water quality criteria under the contract. The 1981 contract identifies 7 locations at which there are specific criteria that the Department of Water Resources is to maintain. Specifically, the one that we monitor very closely, because this is the one that seems to drive everything else in a lot of ways, is 3 Mile Slough. I mentioned earlier the D1641 criteria. I'll get into that a little bit more detail. But this chart shows the contract criteria for 2021, beginning in October 2020, which is the beginning of the water year. So the red line here shows the contract criteria through the year. This green bar is the 14-day mean electrical conductivity at Emmetton, in the Sacramento River to Emmetton. And the blue down here is the 14-day mean EC electrical conductivity in the Sacramento River at 3 Mile Slough. We can see over here that's circled that from June 28th through July 13th, the 14-day mean conductivity was exceeded the contract criteria for that period of time. It also exceeded the decision 1641 requirement under the TUCP I mentioned earlier, was also exceeded during that same period of time. D1641 actually has a salinity criteria that runs from April 1 through August 15th. Outside of that period, there's not a salinity standard under decision 1641. Moving upstream to Rio Vista, we also, same things here. We've got the contract criteria. We can see that the criteria at Rio Vista was also exceeded. And this was it started like similar to 3 Mile Slough. The exceedance began on June 28th and came back into compliance on July 8th. The other 5, I don't have slides for the other 5 stations, but the water quality at all 5 of those other monitoring locations within the contract have been within the contract criteria for the entire year.
Gary, staying on that slide for a second, even though, as you said, D1641, their standard ended on August 15th. As you mentioned, our contract criteria extends, the entire year. But I thought particularly the other slide, this one too shows it, but even though it shows the exceedances, it's interesting that, can you show the other slide, Gary? Because it shows it more dramatically. The red line, the criteria changes though in the other months, but the blue line, you could see that the water quality got significantly better and is well below the contract criteria, it looks like.
Yeah, and that's Melinda. That's a result of the project operations and changes in flow in the river. You see it more dramatically here because the salinity. The contract provide protections against ocean salinity intrusion. So as being farther upstream, Rio Vista doesn't see as much of that, the concentration that comes in through the bay, through the bay and up the river. So it does recover more quickly than we see it farther downstream.
And you've been having weekly conversations with DWR about the operations and changes that they make that hopefully end up in results like that. Correct?
Yes, we have been having weekly coordination meetings since early this year. Well, in the spring.
In May, I think.
We've had weekly conversations with DWR to to understand what changes in operations and to identify the concerns that the agency has relative to compliance with the contract. So it's important. I've talked about the 14-day mean electrical conductivity, or EC. The contract is based on this 14-day mean, which is the average of all of the readings that they take over a 14-day period. The reality is that the EC fluctuates with the tides. And you can see significant swings in salinity throughout the day. So the agency has always suggested that folks monitor conditions closely, especially if you're looking at irrigations. And this is an example of what I mean. This is from back in April, but this is this chart here. All these little dots are 15-minute readings of the conductivity. So you can see that during the day, you can have big spikes and pretty decent water quality as the tide, and it's really affected by as the tides go in and out. So you probably don't want to be irrigating if you're an irrigator when the EC is up in this range. You want to monitor things closely and schedule your irrigations as best you can during those better quality periods. Water quality data is available. There's water quality, there's flow data that's available, there's water elevations, velocities, and a lot of other data that's readily available online. CDEC is a very good source of data and fairly easy to access. The state also has the water data library, which has more of the historical data if you're looking for historical, but there are a few locations that are more daily or more current on the water data library. And then the USGS also has data available on their website. These links are available, and Cindy will have this presentation and has this information available for folks if you want to access this.
Yeah, and Gary, I will post all of those links in our drought monitoring page so that they're accessible to everybody.
Okay. And at this point, we're getting into contracts, and I think I'm going to turn it over to Kevin here. Let him.
Thanks, Gary. And if you don't mind, Gary, if you would be in charge of flipping the slides as we go through them.
Sure. Happy to.
Thank you very much, Gary.
So I think before I dive into the details of the contract, I just wanted to say a couple preliminary things. First of all, the value of this 1981 contract between North Delta Water Agency and DWR really comes to the fore in years like this, which is a critically dry year. And Gary talked about some of the other contracts that exist in the Sacramento Valley that are what I call settlement type contracts because they involve prior water rights. But the point Gary made, and I want to emphasize, is that even under those contracts, such as the Sacramento River settlement contracts, in a critically dry year like this, there are reductions in the contract quantities, up to 25% under the Sacramento River contracts and up to 50% under the Feather River contracts. So this contract really is quite extraordinary in that respect. And the second point I want to make is really more of a comment about water rights. I think sometimes maybe we assume that you all know more about water rights than maybe you do, since you have other things going on in your lives. And I just wanted to emphasize the fact that if you hold a water right under state law, whether it's a riparian right, a pre-1914 right, or a post-1914 right that's under a permit or a license, that gives you a right to divert water that's typically referred to as natural flow in the system. And that can include also water that's abandoned upstream under more senior rights. But it does not give you a right to divert and use stored water. And so in a year like this, a lot of the water that's in the system is really there because of the operations of the various reservoirs upstream, including Oroville, which Gary talked about specifically. And there's a lot of debate, as probably you're all aware, in the Delta about the question of whether water that's present in the Delta is natural flow or not. That issue has been debated for many years and probably will be debated for a number of more years. But the important point here is that the water users within North Delta Water Agency really don't need to be part of that debate because of the contract. Because what the contract essentially does is provide water out of storage from Oroville to basically backstop the water rights of the water users within North Delta Water Agency. And we'll talk about some of the specific provisions that do that as I go through the contract. So the contract, just in general, if you read the title of the contract, it's a contract to assure a dependable water supply of suitable quality. So it includes both a water supply component and a water quality component. And Gary has gone through the different locations of the water quality criteria or standards that are contained in the contract. I won't repeat that. There's other protections in the contract relating to changes in natural flow directions, and water surface elevations. We won't spend a lot of time on those today. And then there's a drought emergency provision in Article 4 that I will talk about specifically. Next slide, please. So the Article 4 drought emergency provision requires essentially 3 criteria to be triggered before it goes into effect under the terms of the contract. The first is that the so-called Four River Index, which Gary talked about, is less than an average of 9 million acre feet in 2 consecutive years. Second, the water supplies for the State Water Project agricultural contractors are less than 50% supply, or the water supplies to all State Water Project contractors are reduced by more than 15%. And third, and probably most important for this discussion, a State Water Board emergency regulation is in effect providing for State Water Project operations to maintain water quality different than what's provided under the North Delta contract. Well, this year we have a situation where the first 2 criteria have been met, but the third criterion has not been met at this juncture. So we're going to talk about what the potential implications of that might be. Next slide. When the 3 criteria are met, the contract provides that a special contract claims procedure will be established by the state to expedite and facilitate payment of compensation for loss of net income. And some of you will recall that a procedure of this type was put in place back in 2015. The basic concept here is that if the state can't meet the water quality and water supply requirements of the contract, then this procedure is triggered and the state would compensate farmers, primarily in the Delta, for any economic losses associated with the failure to meet the contract criteria. And you can see there at the bottom of this slide examples of, and these are right out of the contract, examples of the types of economic losses that would be compensated under this procedure. Next slide. We learned in 2015 and previously that when this special contract claim procedure is in place, it's very important to have good information about crops planted and ultimately any impacts on yields that result from lower water quality or other issues with compliance with the contract. The parties that submitted claims back in 2015, it was not an easy process, but ultimately, I think from my standpoint, DWR was fair in the way it approached these claims, as long as they were well documented. But I think the key point here is that if you're going to submit a claim, you need to do some work to document it. You're not going to simply be handed a check by DWR. This is state of California. They have rules they have to comply with. And so you need to be prepared to document whatever claims you're making. As this slide indicates, in 2015, the process took about a year to process and pay, and any disputes regarding claims were settled through binding arbitration. So what's going to happen this year? Well, I mentioned that the third criterion of the drought emergency definition has not been met, but we are in discussions with DWR about possibly entering into an agreement to put the claims procedure in place for 2021. And we have provided a proposed agreement to DWR. We're in the process of seeing if we can reach agreement on the terms of that agreement. So we're hoping to have an announcement fairly soon on whether the claims procedure will be put in effect this year. And if so, there will be specific timelines for submission of claims. And again, it'll be very important to document those claims if they're submitted.
Kevin?
Yes.
I just want to share with everybody, as you said, we're at the discussion stage still. We've given them a proposal. If, though, the agency is able to reach agreements, our agency will hold another public meeting like this and provide the opportunity for DWR, because they're the one that establishes the claims process. We will have a special board meeting for the process and procedures to be explained at that time.
Yes, thank you. Next slide, Gary. So these are just some of the key provisions of the contract that provide some of the protections that we've talked about. This just states the general concept that the contract constitutes the full and sole agreement between the state and the agency, both as to the quality of water which will be provided and the payment, which is the payments that are made by the agency every year. And then the last clause I think is important, and said diversions and uses within the agency shall not be disturbed or challenged by the state so long as this contract is in full force and effect. Next slide. And this provision is similar in that it recognizes the right of the water users within the agency to divert from the Delta channels, and using similar language down there about halfway through the provision, and said diversions and uses shall not be disturbed or challenged by the state so long as this contract is in full force and effect, and the state shall furnish such water as may be required within the agency to the extent not otherwise available under the water rights of water users. That last clause is sort of dovetails with the comment I made earlier about this supply essentially backstopping the water rights held by water users within the agency. Essentially what that is saying is, to the extent you're a riparian or appropriative right holder and you don't have water available under your rights, that the state, through the State Water Project, will furnish such water as may be required to backstop those rights. Very important concept. So that's the sort of the opening presentation. from me and Gary. If there's any questions or discussion of any of those points, we'd be happy to address them now.
I think we were gonna wait to the end. We'll let, I think, Michael go and then take questions, because some questions people might have of what you discussed might get answered by a little bit by Michael's presentation.
Yep, good.
Okay, thank you very much, Melinda. And let me start by complimenting North Delta Water Agency for holding this meeting and getting the kind of crowd you've got. I want to be very careful in light of the crowd and the lawyers and all that kind of stuff. I don't want to be quoted as making statements against interest of the Office of Delta Water Master or the State Water Resource Control Board. And yet I want to be very frank and open about what's going on and where there are points of controversy. And I would start by simply saying, I've listened carefully to everything Gary and Kevin have said, and everything that they've said is consistent with what I understand and the way we are approaching elements of this. I want to get into some more detail, but there was nothing that either Gary or Kevin said about the contract, about the conditions, et cetera, with which I would take issue. So I think the takeaway from Gary is we're in a very serious drought. And irrespective of contracts or regulatory authority or emergency regulations or anything else, that's an important thing for everybody in the Delta to focus on and recognize. We've got desperately low carryover storage in all the rim reservoirs that drain ultimately to the Delta. And looking forward past this water year, which ends in about 6 weeks on September 30th, and looking into the following water year, that desperately low carryover storage presents real risks to the entire Delta watershed, because if we have a dry year in 2022, a lot of the legal issues, a lot of the provisions about the authority of the Delta Water Master, the state board, et cetera, may be essentially put physically beside the point by Mother Nature. So let's be careful to focus on the fact that if there is enough water in the reservoirs to maintain that salinity barrier, there is a palpable risk, which I certainly feel, and my colleagues in the Division of Water Right and people on the water board and all of you recognize that, you know, there's a physical risk to the Delta in terms of salinity at the door, potentially without enough supplemental water available from the reservoirs to keep that net positive freshwater flow that holds salinity at bay. So I just want that as kind of overall understanding of the risks and concerns that we're all facing about the physical circumstances that we have here in the Delta. Next thing I want to say is that in the Office of the Delta Water Master, we are quite familiar with the North Delta contract, thanks to dialogue over years with Melinda, with your board, with your lawyers, with your engineers, and internally with our colleagues in the Division of Water Rights, with our Office of Chief Counsel, et cetera. And I've already said that nothing that Kevin described is any different from what we understand. So everything that we do in the Office of Delta Water Master from a regulatory approach in these significantly dry conditions is in the context of recognizing the validity and the range of that contract. Having said that, and without gainsaying that at all, I want to go into what impacts of the emergency regulation, which was adopted by the board and then approved by the Office of Administrative Law and went into effect on last Friday, the 20th of August. Many of you will already have received, and anybody who hasn't yet gotten it in the snail mail, you will get in the snail mail a cover letter, an initial order signed by the Deputy Director of the Division of Water Rights, Eric Ekdahl, but that covers all water rights in the Delta watershed, roughly between 16 and 17,000 water rights held by a total of about 6,000 individual holders. There will be a letter sent, a physical in the mail letter sent to each one of the water rights. So somebody who holds multiple water rights will get multiple letters. Each letter will does specify a specific unique identifier, the number of a license, the number of a statement of diversion and use. It'll also have in that letter a specific username and password. And some of those water rights will be curtailed, some won't have been curtailed, and that will be dynamically updated over time on the Water Board's website. But in any case, when you get the letter, that is each discrete water right, whether it's curtailed or not curtailed, whether it's curtailed now or curtailed later, whether it never gets curtailed, whatever the circumstances, every one of those water rights is required under the order to take action. And that's an important factor for everybody on this meeting to hear, that whether you're curtailed or not, whether you contest the board's authority or not, the order is written to require that you take action. And that action essentially is to submit an electronic form on the board's website. And I want to, at this point, if you'll allow me, Cindy, I would share my screen with a hard copy of what.
Yeah, you should be able to.
Okay, so let me try and do that. It's hard for me to walk and chew gum at the same time, so I think I can do this. And let me know if and when you see.
We see
Yeah,
it.
we see it.
Okay, so again, this is a PDF of the form that you would find, and you only get to this form and have the opportunity to fill it in if you've got a unique identifier for a water right, a username, and password. So all that is in the letter that you've gotten, and you need that information in order to get to this. So I'm gonna go through this pretty quickly. I'll stop and go over it anywhere anybody wants me to. But basically, this repeats the fact that all water right holders and claimants who receive this initial order are required to file this form. The deadline for that was set at September 3rd, 2 weeks after the regulation went into effect and the letters went out on August 20th. So even though the emergency regulation allows the water board to require information in responses in a shorter time frame, the E-reg says 7 days. There is a 14-day window here. There will be a workshop put on by the Division of Water Rights, who's kind of the owner and manager of this form, that will take place on August 31st. So if you need more information, that's another place to get it, to ask questions, to talk to the people who are managing this process for the Division of Water Rights. But in any case, you need to fill in this form. The information that I'm kind of scrolling through tells you how to navigate the form and tells you what the basis is and so forth. Very importantly, it tells you, it gives you notice that you've received the last snail mail, hard copy, paper document that you're going to get about the drought under this emergency regulation, which went into effect on August 20th. And it could be in effect for up to a year. It could be removed earlier if we get a ton of rain. We should all hope so. But it could be renewed in the event that 2022, the water year starting October 1st, 2021, proves to be dry. And the water board, the projects, non-project reservoir operators, water users throughout the state are necessarily going to be conservative because storage is so low. So even if we get some early season rain, I frankly am not expecting that this regulation will be relaxed significantly, except to the extent that we get an atmospheric river that comes in that gives us an opportunity to augment some of that depleted storage and get some flushing action. So I'm hoping that we'll be in a position, sometime in October, November, December, where we all have to huddle inside because it's raining like a son of a bitch outside. Pardon me. It's raining hard outside. We should hope that, but obviously plan for that not to be the effect. So one of the things that is really important for people to understand is that future updates and information about the administration of the board's authority with respect to the water right in the Delta watershed will come by electronic method. And the two primary ways of doing that, take your choice or do both. Sign up for the LIRIS list, which you can find from this letter, so that you get a push email to your email address that tells you when something changes and can direct you to the specific place on the water board's website where you can look up your specific water right number on a status list, and it'll very clearly tell you by month in August, curtailed or not curtailed, green or red. In September, curtailed or not curtailed, green or red. And that'll be updated month by month as we go forward, because the methodology that the Division of Water Rights uses to make the critical determination as to whether water is available at your specific water rights priority, terms, and conditions are whether that determination is that you've got water and therefore not curtailed, or you don't have access to water, in which case you are curtailed. And you are required to be cognizant of whether your water right is curtailed or not. As Kevin said earlier, water rights are property right, but they are limited by certain regulations, by the conditions underlying that water right. And water right holders are responsible for knowing whether they are curtailed or not curtailed under the emergency regulation. And there's an old saying that ignorance of the law is not a defense. This is notice to you that you have a responsibility to check to see on a regular basis whether you're curtailed or not. If you sign up for the e-notification, the LIRIS list, you'll get a notice from the water board when things change, so that you can have confidence in knowing whether you're curtailed or not. So that's a really important thing. This goes through the curtailment process. What I've just described shows you where you can subscribe to the email list, where you can look on the board's water site, website, to find this information on a regular basis. And it's live today. You can go and see it and find it. Then this is the section of what you need to do in order to respond to the initial order. Whether you're curtailed or not, you have to do some actions. So the first thing is you have to certify either that you subscribe to the e-list or that you will take it upon yourself to frequently check the Drought webpage because you either don't want to or refuse or don't have a computer or whatever reason you might have for not subscribing to the push email list. This certifies that you understand that you are responsible for checking often and knowing what the status of your water right is. And it says right in here that you're not excused by failure to subscribe or failure to check. If you are curtailed and you don't observe the requirements of that curtailment, you're not going to be able to excuse that failure by, I didn't know, I didn't check, I didn't understand, because you have to push this button here to say that you certify that you have either subscribed or that you'll check often, and that you understand that failure to do so does not excuse violation of the regulation as it changes from time to time, depending on conditions in the Delta watershed from curtailed to not curtailed. The second thing is that you have to indicate as the appropriate mail receiver, either as the owner or agent for the owner of the water right. So the person who got the letter is the person who is designated as the mail receiver within the report management system of the state board. As a water right holder, you are required to keep that up and keep it current and know who your agent is or know who the information goes to. And this is particularly important in the Delta, where a water right holder may be a widow or a child of somebody who filed for this report a long time ago. But whomever is that currently designated mail receiver is the one who gets that mail. And the second thing you're required to do is certify that you have alerted anybody who's got an entitled right to take water under that water right. Let's say a tenant farmer, a ditch tender, you know, whomever can turn on or off the siphon or the pump, whomever is legally entitled to take water under the water right has been informed that this order has been received. So that's the second important thing. You're responsible for whomever's turning on or turning off the pump. Third thing you have to do is certify that if you're curtailed at some point in the future, because frankly, most of the people who are going to be listening here are not currently curtailed. We'll get into that in a minute. But if you are curtailed, that is, if the circumstances change, you will cease immediately to divert under this water right. Now we'll talk about how the contract impacts that and how the methodology impacts whether it's toggle on for curtailment or toggle off for non-curtailment. But you have to certify here that in the event your water right is curtailed, you will cease diversion under that water right. Even if you reserve the right to contest the adequacy, accuracy, or authority under which you were curtailed, it is critically important that you understand that this is an adopted regulation that's been approved by the Office of Administrative Law, adopted by the state board, and will be administered in the Delta by the Office of the Delta Water Master. So that's the third thing you're certifying. Now there are, of course, exceptions, and probably none of these three exceptions is going to be particularly important to the North Delta diverters, but one is non-consumptive use. The classic one is a situation where water is diverted to run through penstocks to create hydropower, and the water at the bottom of the penstock runs right back into the stream, just at a lower elevation, but at the same time. So there are exceptions for non-consumptive uses. You don't want to curtail them. You want to let that water run through the penstock and produce the energy. Just as an aside, the Hyatt power plant at the base of the Oroville Dam has ceased operations because the water supply is so low. I understand that's the first time it has happened since Oroville initially filled. And the Department of Water Resources is taking the opportunity of being offline to do some upgrades and updates and fixes at the Hyatt power plant. But that gives you another indication of how bad the current drought is, followed by the years last year, which was also dry. Secondly, there's an exemption for minimum human health and safety. Think of it as 55 gallons per person per day for domestic use. And there are conditions there. You can't be, watering outside vegetation, no landscape irrigation. You got to be in the highest level drought planning. But this is essentially a municipal and industrial domestic use exception for minimal amounts. And there will be probably one of these exceptions within the Delta. We are working with one of the diverters in the Delta who does have a legitimate need for providing water under a curtailed water right for minimum health and safety. So there is, from our office perspective, at least one of these human health and safety, not in the North Delta, so I'll keep going on. And then there are at least the potential for water sharing agreements among various water users, maybe some who will be curtailed, some who won't. And if they can get together, make sure they're not injuring other legal users, not doing anything to injure the environment, and otherwise consistent with the water code, there may be some circumstances. I'm not aware that any of that is likely or necessary in the North Delta. But in any case, there are these three potential exceptions. And if you note up here that you will cease immediately in the event that you're curtailed, but you propose to claim one of these exemptions, this is where you check the box and then provide additional information to alert the water board. This next issue in the red box is, I think, very important to the North Delta Water Agency for the reasons that Gary and Kevin have described, and with which I've said the Office of the Delta Water Master proceeds consistent with our understanding of the contract. So this says, select all alternative sources of water that serve the place of use associated with this water right or claim. If you select other, described below. If there are no alternatives, select none. So you've already said that if you get curtailed, you will cease diversion under that water right order. Again, even if you're going to litigate that the Delta Water Master doesn't have authority, or the Division of Water Rights, or the Deputy Director, or anybody, you're contesting the validity, the accuracy of the information, et cetera, et cetera.
Michael, we're having some problem. Michael?
Yep.
Michael?
Yes.
I don't know if you need to slow down maybe or something, but just so you're aware, there is some technical difficulties in the audio we're receiving for you. So this is the most important part of what we wanted you to discuss. So I just wanted to give a moment and see if it clears up, but I guess I would just ask, slow down a little bit so that we're making sure the audio is clear. Thanks.
Okay, and if the audio is unclear, I could get off this headset and dial in. And if this condition persists, tell me. You can go on to something else. It'll take me about 3, 4, 5 minutes to re-up. So how's my audio right now?
Right now, it's a little bit better. So Cindy's going to look on our end, but I just wanted you to be aware, but you're sounding okay right now. And if you
Melinda,
just.
it may be
Yes.
on your end because it's very good at
Yeah.
my device.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Yeah.
As long as everybody else can hear, that's good news. Thanks.
Okay, so in the circumstances of North Delta Water Agency, if your underlying right, or claim, whether it's an unadjudicated riparian or pre-14 claim is curtailed, or if you only have a license, which is curtailed, or if you're diverting under a permit, which is curtailed, because you're in the North Delta Water Agency, you do have an alternative source of water. And so what you should do here, going down this list, you're not diverting previously stored water in your own name. That is, you don't have a contract for receiving previously stored water, like a settlement contract under the CVP or a feather water settlement contract under the SWP. So don't bother with that one. That'll confuse the machine reading. You're probably in the North Delta not using groundwater. You don't have a contracted supply. You're not hauling water. So click other. And then it says, if you selected other above, please provide additional information regarding your alternate source of water. Now, I'm cognizant of the fact that nobody with a water right wants to acknowledge that it is insufficient to the needs to which it's put. And so what information are you going to put in here? I've got language that I think makes sense, but it's important that you take this language with whatever grain of salt you want and consult with your own advisors. And so this is not magic language that we're insisting on. It's language that at Melinda's request, I developed yesterday, consistent with all that you've heard from Kevin and me. And I'll recite the language and then I'll tell you why the elements are in this language. But again, you could put something in here as brief as NDWA contract, NDWA water supply contract, NDWA contract with state of California, the 1981 NDWA contract. It's important to get NDWA in there or write it out, North Delta Water Agency, because that's the tell for us when we look at this comment. So here's the language that I developed yesterday. The place of use for this water right is within the boundaries of the North Delta Water Agency. Therefore, should the underlying water right be deemed insufficient to support diversion and use, I claim the right to make up any alleged deficiency to meet beneficial use under the water supply contract between NDWA and the state of California. First of all, it's a clear reference to the contract. It doesn't admit anything about the sufficiency of your underlying water right. It simply says, if it's deemed insufficient, I claim the right to continue diverting under the alternative water supply provided under the contract. Now, again, the key thing to get in there is either the name North Delta Water Agency or NDWA. And as long as you are putting water to non-wasteful beneficial use on property within the North Delta Water Agency's boundaries, that backup supply is recognized and respected by our office. So you've got up to 5,000 characters to put into this box. You don't need to use that many. Just make sure you get NDWA or North Delta Water Agency and reference to the contract somewhere in whatever you say. And we are not dogmatic about the specific wording, but we are sensitive to the fact that even if you have a curtailment notice and you've agreed not to curtail under your water right while you contest it or something else, this clearly indicates that you're going to continue to divert under the authority provided under the water supply provided by that contract.
Hey, Michael, there's a
Michael?
request.
Yeah, if I could, we do have lots of requests for the actual language, which I think was what Lindsay was going to mention. So Michael is, I just want to let everyone know that Michael is going to share that language. When our meeting is over today, we will post it on our website. As Michael said, they're not magic, and we're not, as an agency mandating everybody use the exact language, but it is helpful, and we appreciate him providing something for you to consider using. But as he said, you may want to also just confer with any advisors, including legal counsel. But we will post what he read on the website after the meeting. Thanks.
So I also have the language copied. Michael, there's a request to put it in the chat. Would you like me to do that now, as well as sending it out after the meeting?
That would be fine, Lindsay. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay.
And Lindsay has it because I wrote that language yesterday in response to in an email I sent to her at so that's fine. Yes, put it in the chat. That's fine.
Great, it's in the chat now.
Okay. So just finishing up quickly, these are the fields that you then have to fill in. The individual, the human being who is responsible for filing this form, the real name of a real person. And then there's a drop-down list here where you can say whether you're the legal owner, whether you're an agent, etc. So you can click, and there is a way to click other. And so if you click other, you're going to have to say here, I'm the nephew of the owner who's in a nursing home, dealing with dementia or other family emergencies or something, but something to say by what connection to this water right. If it's other, what is that connection? Who are you? Where are you in relation to the water right? And that should, by the way, be a reminder to you that if you haven't got the these notices coming to the right person, it's because the water right owner has not updated the information on our website, because these letters are going to the people who are designated to be the mail receivers for each of these water rights. And then a phone number so that if there's a question, we can get to you. Similarly, an email, so that if there is an uncertainty, a question, etc., we've got somebody who filled this form in to call, talk to. That's important if we spot an error and we can help you correct the error. It's good to be able to allow us to get in touch with you via that. And then the certification that all the information here is truly correct to the best of your knowledge. And again, I want to emphasize that the language that's now in the chat that I read earlier, that I penned yesterday, is not magic language. And if you change it around, or if your advisor wants to do it, or you want to make it simpler, as long as you're in good faith, your risk of being prosecuted for perjury is zero. Only when you fill in all these required fields can you finally hit the submit button. So you can go from page to page through this, filling it in, but it only sticks, it only counts on the last page when you hit submit. So don't forget that. Don't think you're done until you're done and hit submit. And again, under the order, you're required to fill this in on or before September 3rd. If you have a need for an extension, if there's a problem, if you run into a problem, call us, talk to us, we'll help. There are lots of ways to get help, including just calling our office and Christy Mittal, who is the communication outreach specialist in our office. Many of you talk to her from time to time. She's the best first point of contact. Whatever your problem is, she can probably address it. If she can't, she knows how to triage it and get the assistance that you need. So I'm going to quit sharing my screen unless there are questions that I should respond to in the form itself. So I'll leave it up for a minute in case there are questions.
Steve, at this point, I guess we can, open it up for questions that folks may have for any of the speakers, and Cindy will.
That's very good, Melinda. In case Michael or Gary or Kevin need to leave, we could allow people to step in now and pose their questions of the experts. Thank you. So everybody that's out there, if you have any questions, you can bring them up now. And then after Melinda has spoken, agenda item 5, we'll open it up again to questions and comments from the public.
Michael, one of the landowners had a question. Where can I register as a corrected owner?
So on the Water Board's website, under water rights, there are a number of paths to get into the report management system, and specifically what's called ERIMS, the Electronic Water Rights Information Management System. All the forms are there. So every one of 16, 17,000 people who got that letter posted on August 20th have already filed an initial statement or have a water right through a license or something else. And if you're saying something, you're muted, Tiffany or Cindy.
No, we were just saying there are some very long comments that are kind of too long to read, but I was asking her, can everyone see it? And she indicated yes. So I'm assuming everyone, for instance, Brett Baker had a long comment. I'm not sure if he has questions. He can ask a specific question as well. But Cindy was trying to get to any short, quick questions, and then we can turn it to people.
Lindsay did, thank you for posting that. If you'll see on there, I think it was Gil Herringer. I don't know if I said your last name right, but she did post on there on ERIMS for the ownership form for you. Okay, and then someone asked, what if a notice was not received?
So if a notice was not received, it's because within the ERIM system, that was sent to somebody else. And you should, you've got your number and you should go on and figure out who within the ERIMS it was sent to. And of course, it's always possible, highly unusual, but always possible of quote unquote lost in the mail. But in any case, you can go and find your information about the specific water right within ERIMS, and you can find out whether it's curtailed or not through that curtailment status. It's a, I think it's a Tableau sheet, but you can first sort by legal delta. You're located in the legal delta, or you can just sort by owner name or unique identifying number for your statement or your license. So even if you didn't get the snail mail notice, maybe it's just stuck in the USPS system, maybe it's been lost, maybe the dog ate it on the way from the mailbox. You can go and find all the information you need on the Delta Drought webpage.
Okay, one more question I see here is, how can I file an amended statement with this new information?
So there are forms for that on the website. And, you know, frankly, I always hate it when somebody says it's on the website, go find it. It's like, there's the haystack, you find the needle. I will say that the Division of Water Rights has gone out of its way to make this stuff accessible in a specific place. And if you go to that drought, Delta Drought webpage, I'm relatively confident that you can find what you're looking for. And if you can't, you can call Christy and she'll help guide you through it. But the division has really done a good job of trying to make this stuff accessible. We know it's complicated. We know it's difficult to follow all these things, and maybe there's too much information, but it's all there. It's accessible. It's available.
I just want to point out that obviously these notices went to an entire watershed, but we in the Delta are fortunate because we're, I believe, the only region that has a water master and an office with dedicated staff. So I do encourage people to take advantage, you know, as he said, to, you know, contact them directly because his staff can often really help you. So again, I think we're fortunate in that circumstance.
Well, I'm flattered by that because there are a lot of people who don't feel fortunate when they get a call from the Delta Water Master. I also appreciate my colleague and water resource control engineer, Lindsay Kameyer, having posted on here the direct links to those websites so that if anybody has the question, how can I amend, where can I improve the information so that the right person is getting the mail, those links are right in the chat now.
See, exactly. Your office is providing bonuses to our region as we speak. So again, we are fortunate because I don't, you know, sometimes I know the notices when they come out, they do have a phone number to call, but it's literally an answering service. So it takes days for them to get back to you. So again, I do encourage people that you probably can get a hold of the Water Master's staff quicker. So at this time, Cindy, are you ready
Yeah, I
to
think
just
that
have
was
people
all
ask
the-
questions?
Yeah, I think if you guys want to ask
And
questions.
because I want people to be able to ask questions because my presentation is quite brief and not detailed, but there are, you know, they've lots of details provided. So anyone?
You guys can either use the raise your hand button and we can call on you, or don't jump all at once, but if you guys can unmute yourselves and ask a question.
Hey, Michael. Michael.
Yeah, I hear you, Gary.
Gary Keeneland, one thing that you didn't cover here that I think might be helpful for some folks is the enhanced reporting provision of that regulation.
Yeah.
So under the regulation itself, thanks for the question, Gary. Under the regulation itself, there is authority for the Deputy Director of the Division of Water Rights in consultation with the Office of the Delta Water Master, for those of you in the legal Delta, to require enhanced reporting, additional information to be filed by quote unquote larger diverters. In the regulation, larger diverters are those who have a face value, let's say, of a license in excess of 1,000 acre feet per year, or who have reported using 1,000 acre feet per year in a prior year. For the initial order, the enhanced reporting applies only to those who divert 5,000 acre feet or more per year. So Eric Ickdahl and I, in consultation with the large staff that's working on this in the Division of Water Rights and in our office, agreed that for this initial order, the enhanced reporting requirements would be for those diverting or having a face value and allowance to divert in excess of 5,000 acre feet per year. Throughout the Delta watershed, it's about 700 of the 16,000 who fit into that large diverter category. And within that 700, somewhere between 102 and 111, I think, as of yesterday's count, are situated within the legal delta. I will tell you that Lindsay, doing some analysis on that, has discovered that there are some people who have claimed to use more than 5,000 acre feet that probably haven't, and maybe therefore subjected themselves to enhanced reporting, even though they didn't need to. We've got people who say, I got 30 acres of grapes and I've diverted 6,000 acre feet of water to irrigate them. Looks pretty clearly like an error. We can correct that error with them, but because of their error, they're going to be subjected to this. But that's a handful. That's the difference between 102 and 111. In any case, a number of people, I know that one of your board members, Tom Slater from RD99, is on, and RD999 is one of those who are required to do enhanced reporting because they are above the threshold of 5,000 acre feet per year. What does that require? And I'm going to be more general here, but there are forms. I've got to be more general because I'm not as familiar with those forms because they apply to a much smaller number. But essentially, it requires monthly reporting of what you've diverted recently. As you know, when you file annually, you break it down by month, but file annually. So under this enhanced reporting, in order to get better data to inform the methodology for making these critical determinations about supply and demand imbalances. So we're asking these large diverters to tell us on a more regular monthly breakdown basis how many acre feet you actually diverted, and going forward, I think for 3 months, but for a certain number of months, to say what you project in terms of usage. So the enhanced reporting has you every month saying what you, by the 10th of the ensuing month, how much water you diverted in that prior month, and what your projections are for water use in the current month and a couple of months out.
Michael, just to make
what-
sure, I want to make sure everybody knows that this is for a single diversion. Islands such as Staten Island, run by TNC, the Nature Conservancy, has probably 50, 60 diversions. It's not the sum of all those diversions. This reporting requirement would be if you had a single diversion number that used 5,000 acre feet, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Mike,
Gary.
just on that point, that would be true under a statement of diversion and use, which covers a single point of diversion. Would that would not necessarily be true under a permit or license, which might have multiple points of diversion. It's under the water right, not other. It's defined by the water right, not the point of diversion.
Thank you, Gary. Yes.
I'm asking. I meant to put that in a question. I'm not.
So,
you're the regulator here, not me.
yeah, and so I believe you're right, but again, I don't want to be getting out too far over my skis. I haven't looked at that specifically.
Okay.
There are, you know, it's complicated because sometimes for measuring diversions, we look at it one way. For telemetry, we look at it a different way. And so I believe you're correct that it is by water right, not by physical point of diversion. But you're also right that statements of diversion use, the predominant, you know, underlying water right within the delta, those statements of diversion use are defined by single points of diversion. And, you know, they have a specific
Because you're going to ask a question.
area of your place of use.
Michael, I just wanted to point out that the workshop that the Water Board is hosting on August 31st from 9 a.m. to noon, they will be having the overview of the curtailment orders and compliance with filling out the certification form, providing guidance on that. From 1 p.m. to 4 p.m., they will be specifically talking about the enhanced reporting that Gary asked about for the 5,000 acre feet and larger. So just want to make that clear.
Michael, I have,
Now that I heard Gary's question, excuse me, Gary, I'm confused. Is situations such as Staten, where they, they do divert over 5,000 acre feet, but over very many diversions, does that require the enhanced reporting? I don't know now.
So, Steve, I'm familiar with Staten Island, and I know that Staten Island has a number of diversions with a similarly large number of statements of diversion use. I'm not confident that I know whether they also have a license that they claim to divert more than 5,000 acre feet under the license. And I specifically want to disclaim giving advice with respect to specific circumstances. If you've got specific circumstances, the best advice is to talk to your water lawyer, not to your regulator. There's kind of, the regulations are written. If there's confusion about them, we'll try and resolve the confusion, but individual water right owners should consult their own advisors. If there's a question about how does this apply to me, whether it applies to me, et cetera. The regulations are complicated, and I don't want to be offering, for instance, advice that somebody will say, well, heard Michael George say this on the broadcast, and this is all being recorded. So here's what he said. And what I am specifically saying is I'm disclaiming giving specific advice about how these regulations impact an individual water user in its unique circumstances.
Thank you. I can understand that. And that's good. All right.
I believe that before Mark Van Camp had his hand raised. Did you still have a question, Mark?
I think my screen showed that Mark Van Camp left. But,
Okay.
he may have.
The Hanson reporting may have been the question, because the second you asked that question, he put his hand down. So there are other questions here. I'm going to go to the next one. It's Brian Bush asked, if our water right is curtailed and we are diverting under the NDWA contract, why do we need to report when it will always be zero under the water right?
So I refuse to answer. It's like your mother tells you, it's because I said so. That's the regulation, and it is designed to get better quality data to support the dramatically improved methodology that we use to make these critical determinations. So, sorry, it's just the requirement.
Michael, yeah, I thought in prior conversations I've had with you that it really is about the ability of the water board. They have to understand the usage going on in the system for them to use the methodology and curtail, I guess, by priority is so even though you're not using it under that water right, they still need to know if you are using water, or is
Exactly. What we're trying to get at is demand versus supply. So you've got to understand what the demand is. Even though it may be under various nested rights, And Brian asked that question, and RD 2068, like a lot of people, are unique circumstances where we've worked with RD 2068. They report their water use primarily under a license, which has now been curtailed. They have within RD 2068 a number of statements of diversion and use, which under an agreement that we made in 2017, they essentially deactivated, so that RD 2068 takes all the water into its system at two places, one on Haas Slough and one at a weir, which gets drainage water from the west. So as I say, we agreed that it made sense to show all that water coming in those two places. We simplified the circumstances of reporting. But now we know that even though RD 2068 is going to say, yeah, we understand our license is curtailed, we've got a fallback, and our individual water users have a fallback to their claims for riparian or pre-14 water rights. But even if the license is curtailed and one reason or another, the statement of diversion and use water right is curtailed, we've still got the North Delta Water Agency contract. And that way the water board understands that that demand, non-wasteful use on the North Delta property, is going to continue to be a demand. And we will make that information available through the methodology to inform these critical decisions about whether or not and at what level of priority people have to be curtailed.
I have a question here that I'll read. I think it's for Kevin, and I think he's just leaning over and still listening. But it says, are there water agreements for Southern California water agencies, or maybe it's Michael, that are senior and will take preference over the North Delta Water Agency contract?
So
I mean-
Kevin is muted and off camera, so I'll go ahead and say what is my view. There's nobody who is a service contractor, the state water contract, who has an independent owned right to divert water from the Delta, unless they potentially incidentally own other land or have a diversion to the Delta. But you don't need to worry about a state water contractor having seniority. Their water contract is a contract with the state water project, which has its own priority. And those priorities.
They do get curtailed and have been under their contracts. And I think Kevin in his presentation he was talking about the Sac Valley, that within those contracts, they do in fact, get curtailed and get notice separate from the water board. So both the CVP and SWP send out notices to them of that their water supply will be reduced, and by what percentage.
And also it's important to know that both the CVP and the SWP, which are, relatively junior appropriators, they've got a whole bunch of licenses, but they're basically post 1927, 8 in that area. They're all curtailed currently. So the projects are not allowed to take more water into storage. They can't divert that water and store it. If there is any input to their storage reservoirs, they are currently required and do bypass that flow because their diversion rights are currently curtailed.
So we have another one. It says, just so I'm clear on this, if I go to DWA website and it says I'm curtailed, which again, that would be Division of Water Rights, not Department of Water Resources, because this is a State Water Resources Control Board authority. But it says it is confusing because it is the Division of Water Rights with State Water Resources Control Board. Yes, there are two DWRs, but in this case, it's Division of Water Rights. but
I can still divert.
yeah, but can I still divert under the North Delta 1981 contract? And I'll just say that I'll always remember one of our former board members worked for RD 900, and he said, yeah, I remember in the 1990s drought, they were doing the curtailment notices, but he said they would follow up with a phone call, and they'd call us and say, okay, you've stopped diverting under your water right, ABC 1, 2, 3. And he would answer that, yes, I have. But when I turned off my license number, 1, 2, 3 ABC pump, I then turned on my North Delta Water Agency pump. And so I am diverting under, the North Delta Water Agency contract. I mean, I'm sure Kevin might be cringing. That's not a legal answer. But Kevin, they're basically wanting to confirm and hear that they can still divert under the contract, even if they went to the Division of Water Rights and saw that their water right is curtailed.
I think this is Steve Mello. I think it's important that people understand whether they are or are not within the boundaries of the North Delta Water Agency. And, people basically on their property tax bill, there is a line that says NDWA assessment. I don't know how else they would other than looking at our map, but how would you let somebody, can the water board let somebody know that they're in the North Delta Water Agency? How else would one find out that you're in or out other than looking at your property tax bill?
Steve, they can, and we have received phone calls like that to our office where we can look up.
I can look up by APN and county number.
Yeah, if they have their APN, we can look it up for them.
Very well. Thank you very much.
But Kevin, if you just want to, I gave my little story to answer it, but if legally you want to add anything, they're just saying, can I still continue to divert? Even though my water right has been curtailed, can I continue to divert under the 1981 contract?
And the answer is yes.
Real quick question. Somebody had, I think Gary had, why should water users within NDWA check other instead of contracted supply on the certificate?
Says chat is disabled.
So the reason that I advise checking other rather than contracted water supply is consistent, I think, with the way water right attorneys in the North Delta are advising their clients. That is, your underlying water right is probably sufficient to your needs. If it's not, you've got a backup supply, but you're not depleting from the state water project. You're using your.
Go ahead, Michael.
You're diverting under your own water right unless and until it's deemed to be insufficient. I know that some people are contesting the sufficiency of our methodology, and there are people in the Delta who disagree with authorities for curtailment, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm trying to be respectful of those, as Kevin said, unresolved issues that are out there that the North Delta, frankly, doesn't have to worry about because of the availability of that contract. If and when, and to the extent, ultimately, a court years from now determines that the underlying water right either was or was not sufficient. So that's why the advice that I'm giving in terms of the forms developed and managed by our colleagues in the Division of Water Rights, I'm focused on what, in light of what I know and in light of my jurisdiction within the Delta, I would advise people to do. Now, is somebody going to go to jail if they check the wrong button, as long as they're trying to give us the right information? No, Nobody's going to go to jail. What we're trying to do is get the best information into that methodology so that out of that methodology comes consistent, reliable data on which to make the critical determinations as to whether to curtail or not curtail. And going back to Brian's good question, why should we do this? We should do this so you get better information into that methodology, which will help spit out better information that will allow more reliable determinations by the Division of Water Rights and the Office of Delta Water Master.
I'll just add a comment that if you asked a dozen lawyers how to fill out these forms, you'd probably get a dozen different answers. But I think this one falls in the category, again, of do it this way because your mother told you to. In this case, Michael's calling the shots, and I think my advice would be to listen to him.
I have one housekeeping item. A couple people indicated they were showing disabled. The chat was disabled. Cindy thinks she's fixed it. We are continuing to receive, so it clearly is working for some. So if it's still a problem for you, it sounds like it got fixed. Could you go back? I think somebody had asked a question, Michael, though, for the water users or water right holders in the North Delta. Why do they need to check the other box instead of the
That's what he just explained.
Oh, sorry. Never mind.
Yeah, that's what he was talking about. Brett, you had made some comments earlier. Did you want to, yours were quite lengthy. I wasn't sure if it was something you wanted to share.
I'll just chime in. I'd like to thank Michael for providing unsolicited legal advice. I too would like to disclaim any liability for anything I may have said in the chat box. I agree with Kevin. If you ask a dozen lawyers, you'd probably get, except I'd say you'd get 13 different answers about what we put in there and depending upon which day it was of the week. So yeah, no, I just appreciate Michael for taking the time to be here and go over all this, and likewise the staff of the agency for explaining the claims procedure and whatnot. Thank you all very much.
Well, and I want to take the opportunity to congratulate Brett Baker on his new fatherhood.
I was hoping you were going to mention the future, but I was hoping you were going to talk about Open ET. But yeah, no, 8-day-old baby at home. So if I look a little tired, I apologize.
You're going to look a little tired for the next 18 years until he goes to college.
We have a quick question asking if I divert under 5,000 acre feet under my right, do I still need to do enhanced reporting? And this is a quick answer. No, that enhanced reporting only applies currently to over 5,000 acre feet. Again, as Michael said, though, there could be new notices later that reduce it down to 1,000, for instance, if I understood your presentation clearly. But right now, the quick answer to this question is no, enhanced reporting does not apply to you. Just the regular.
Correct.
Just the regular reporting that he explained earlier on the form.
Right. And if that changes, you'll be notified if you subscribe to the LIRIS list, or there are circumstances in which I might use that authority to reach out directly to an individual user and say, under that authority, I need more information from you. So it could be as granular as an individual down to 1,000 acre feet, or as broad as everybody over currently 5,000 acre feet for broad reporting.
Is there any, I don't see any more written questions. So.
The question is for folks who have either do not have internet in our rural areas, or those who do not have access, can we direct them to the Water Master's office for help?
Yes, we're always available to help. I will say that I have developed over my now 6.5 years as Delta Water Master a reduced sympathy for people who say I don't have a computer and so forth. If you know, if you're diverting a public resource to your private use, as you have an absolute right to do, there are responsibilities that go along with that. There are conditions on that. And I personally don't think it's a lot to ask somebody to be in touch with electronic means. And if that means you have to go to the public library and use their computer, then go to the public library and use their computer. Or go find yourself a teenager and use their device. It is not an excuse that we got bad broadband or, I haven't got a computer. I was at a meeting back in 2015 when I was a green young Delta Water Master, and I was in a big meeting at the Roberts Union Farm Center, and somebody in the back of the room said, "Mr. George, this is ridiculous. I haven't even got a computer. How am I going to be able to follow all of this stuff?" And I was taken off the hook by a lovely woman in the front row who said, "Harvey, that's bullshit. I just got an email from you this morning. I got it right here on my phone." So I've always kept that lesson in mind.
Well, I think that just on the internet note, Starlink, which is Elon Musk's internet, I think is coming to the Delta. So the satellite options and the uploads pretty high uploads. So and downloads.
And to be crystal clear, you have to get to an internet-enabled device in order to file this form on the Water Board's website. So if you have to go to the library, or if you have to go to Aunt Sadie's house or whatever, you got to do it.
Yeah, while they could call your office and they can advise what to click and fill out, your office cannot fill it out for them.
That is correct. You've got to have your own username, identification number, and password. And that's critical for the protection of your water right. Only you can acknowledge these things. You are the claimant or the owner of a water right, and only you can do this stuff.
Would anyone like to ask a question? I think we're running towards the end of the chat questions.
Yeah.
Anyone brave enough to ask one? If that's it, we are getting close to the end, and I just have a quick, I'm on the agenda for a quick item. But I just wanted to,
Oh, wait, do you wanna?
yeah, go ahead. You can put that. She's going to put up a slide, but really it's not.
Melinda,
Yes.
this is Jack Keekly. Just before you get started on the next item,
Mhm.
I just want to quickly say, I think most of us have the opportunity to deal with all sorts of regulators and different government agencies. I just want to thank Michael George and the Water Master's office for the incredible amount of attention and time that they have spent with the North Delta Water Agency, not only this year, but over past years. And whether you want to agree or not agree on ability to connect with technology to their office or whatever, I really want to thank them for their help and their transparency in dealing with us on all these issues. I think it is a transparency and a generosity of spirit that, frankly, I don't see from most other agencies, and it's refreshing and greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Jack.
Yeah, ditto. So at this point, we've tried to do our best to, talk about the conditions and the actions that, we are aware of right now. But as was discussed earlier, these drought conditions may continue into next year. As Michael said, the water year officially ends at the end of September. So October 1 is the start of the new water year. And when I've talked to people that have experience longer than I do, they do, say that this year is very much like 1977 was. I think it's a little bit worse in some respect that Gary had gone over earlier. But but in 1970 and in 1977, be aware, I believe they put in 5 drought barriers to prevent salinity intrusion, and those seem to have worked. They did not lose control of the water quality. But the big difference, is it rained in 1978. And so really, if we enter in 2022, that these conditions continue, from the people I've talked to, we really are entering uncharted territory. I'm sure this will not be our last drought briefing. And so with that, I'm just going to talk about, a couple of 3 things that we are foreshadowing, if you will, for 2022. We have been notified, if anyone's attending the Delta Protection Commission meetings, a DWR staff person, Jacob McQuirk, recently gave a presentation to them that one of the things they are in the planning stage right now is the potential to install more temporary drought barriers next year in 2022. As you know, this year they have installed a drought barrier at False River, as they did in 2015. So next year their plan would be to reinstall the False River, but to add 2 more drought barriers on both Sutter and Steamboat Sloughs. So at this point, the agency has had some initial meetings with Jacob to talk about in 1977, when they did the temporary barrier in Sutter Slough. The agency did a memorandum of permit with DWR that specified a lot of pre-survey work that would need to be done, and then that was done. Looking at all of the existing diversions that they had and the type they are and their elevations and what have you. And the permits included numerous specific mitigation measures. So for instance, it was making sure that there were temporary pumps and power to those pumps that was available to landowners if they were having difficulty with their existing diversions, to ensure continued water availability. That's just an example of mitigations. So in addition, I think it was last Friday, I believe, Jacob, pursuant to our discussions with them, he and his staff did follow through and met with a select group of some farmers in these sloughs, and particularly those that had experience from the Sutter Slough, a dam that was installed in 1977, to help initiate those discussions, if you will. So right now, again, this is very much a planning stage. There is nothing for us to yet as an agency report to you, or even for DWR. But we do want you to be aware we have initiated those discussions as early as possible with them, so that we can work with them on an agreement for the mitigation measures, but also talk about the location as well of where the placement would actually occur, so that hopefully we're reducing the impacts to some of these individual diversions. So again, at the point when, months from now, when we have more details on a proposal, then we will have a specific special public briefing, informational briefing like this on the barriers themselves. The other thing that our agency, plus both the South and Central Delta water agencies, have been meeting with state representatives on what we're calling a Delta Dry Year Response Plan. It essentially involves trying to identify an amount of water that could be conserved between January and June in dry and critically dry years. But also part of that would the state providing financial incentives for this voluntary conservation. Again, it would not be a mandated conservation. It's a concept of volunteering. But at this point, our discussions with them is very conceptual. So again, there's nothing specific we can provide to the public yet, but we are getting closer at the point where we hopefully will be talking more specifically about this. We've explained to the state that if for next year they, want to see farmers make decisions either to change their crop type or maybe even fallow in order to conserve a certain amount of water, that, those decisions by those farmers need to be made this fall. So we do want to make that clear. If they want this to be able to be implemented at all next spring, something really needs to be done this fall. Again, we'll come back forward with more. I think OSHA has pointed out that a DWR is working on a draft EIR for the barriers. I believe that's correct. And again, we don't have anything. They've not released a draft, I don't believe. So there's at the point where there's more on the barriers, we will come back and have meetings.
Melinda, I thought that DWR was exempted by the governor of dealing with the CEQA.
That's true. Yeah. Thank you. Good point, Steve. Yeah. Thank you. You did just remind me. The governor's proclamation does in fact exempt DWR from CEQA for purposes of the drought barriers. I believe they are working OSHA on an EIR for the False River because again, this was the second time they've installed it, and they plan in future drought years to reinstall. So for the Sutter and Steamboat sloughs, I don't believe they are preparing one, but they did tell us the governor's proclamation does not exempt them from all of the regulatory permits that they would be required to get. So I believe that would include like a 401 certification from the water board. It would include a permit from the Central Valley Flood Protection Board for the U.S. Army Corps approval. So the Fish and Game has I believe an incidental take permit that would be required. So that permitting process. And again, really when they get to a point where there's more of a proposal for us to understand and talk about, we'll, come forward with that. Thanks, Steve. Finally, Kevin had talked about the agency is currently in discussions or has a proposal sent to them to go ahead and implement in 2021 the special contract claims procedure based on the conditions that exist, even though that all three of the criteria in the contract for the drought emergency provision have not been triggered. But it goes without saying then 2022, obviously, if all three are triggered in 2022, they're automatically the contract requires DWR to implement the claims procedure. If all three are not triggered, we would, as an agency, likely initiate discussions as we did this year to consider implementing based on the conditions that exist. And with that, we just kind of wanted to give as I said, foreshadowing for 2022, but none of us really know what's going to happen. But as Michael said, we are already experiencing some fairly dire conditions. So next year could be some uncharted territory where even under our contract, the agency will just have to, do our best to work with the agencies to be creative on mitigation measures to reduce the impacts on our water users. And with that, I guess, Steve, we could open it back up to any further questions since that's the last agenda item.
Thank you very much. Before I open it up to questions, comments from the public, I'd like to remind everyone that if you look at the 1906 to now graph, it will show some very, very low runoff years over the years. And I went and visited my 101-year-old uncle the other day. who was a teenager in the drought that lasted into the mid-30s. And I recalled the North Delta program plan, and Stain Buer was the main engineer, head engineer. And he had a bunch of lines on a map that showed how far into the Delta unsuitable water for irrigation came in. And I believe it was 1933, they showed the brackish water clear to Cortland. So if we don't get appreciable rainfall, we could be in a world of hurt. And I just want everybody to be aware that even though we have a contract, if the water agencies, the state and federal water agencies lose control of the salinity gradient in the Delta, there won't be enough water in the dams to get it back until a very, very big rainfall event. So if there's no fresh water to divert, our contract doesn't mean much. So be aware of the fact that we may not have good quality water eventually. So hate to be alarmist, but that's a fact. And now I'd like to open up to questions and comments from the public.
Well, just on that, Steve, because there's still value in the contract. As we said, our contract has things like the claims process, which does compensate landowners. So there are these other things that come into play, even in that dire situation. So.
Agreed. I'm glad. Thank you for pointing that out. But I've had people say that, oh my goodness, I'm going to be able to do this or that next year because I'm going to have water. Well, if there's not suitable water quality in the system to divert, much good to have the contract. Now, there are other provisions of the contract that are very important to us, but be aware that if there's not suitable water quality,
I still want to. The contract is still good, and there are the other provisions. But as you said, it really next year is.
Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah, as you said, the quality really does become an issue that next year if we enter this uncharted territory. So, yeah, that's true.
I don't think there's any more.
Did I
questions.
mention something about the drought barriers?
Yes.
Just on that, I mean, yeah, I know, I guess what I was going to start to put in the chat, it just got kind of long, was my understanding is that DWR for a few years has been working on like a program EIR that could cover the drought barrier placement over like a 5, or I can't remember if it was maybe 10-year period. So that work has been underway. Now, laid on top of that is the currently declared drought emergency and whatnot. I think from our perspective, if DWR is going to move forward on any of the northern barriers in particular, it would be good if it could be in the context of that EIR that would have, hopefully better planning and adequate mitigation measures and all the things that, we would think would be important to protect those water users in particular on those 2 sloughs. So I don't really know, it may be that DWR ends up going forward under emergency for the placement of those barriers. It just crossed my mind that it seems like we're in August of 2021 right now. And if there was a way to move forward with the environmental review process, at least for the purpose of having like better planning and mitigation, that would be good. So I'll try to find out more about that. And it sounds like
they were clear. They are not. Okay, they under the proclamation, they don't have to, they are not. Yes, I recall the longer term programmatic one. Haven't heard about it for a while, but they were clear for these barriers. They will not, which is why our discussions with them were pointing out the importance of them doing a memorandum of permit with our agency as they did in 1977. At that time, it was just Sutter Slough. This time it would be 2, because in that it does have mitigations to reduce the impacts as you would in an EIR. So in lieu of that, we said it really does, frankly, make this permit more important.
Okay. Someone had a question, Michael, in regards to the HANCE reporting. It says, will the 5,000 acre feet requirement be per water right or cumulative of a property owner's multiple water rights across multiple properties? Also, prior paperwork had stated 1,000 acre foot reporting requirements, but people are going to be they'll be notified if they have enhanced reporting, correct?
Correct. They'll be notified if they have enhanced reporting. And as we got into in a prior discussion, the difference between 1,000 and 5,000 is that the regulation allows you to go down to 1,000 acre feet per year. But in consultation, the Division of Water Rights and the Office of the Water Master agreed that for the initial order to be 5,000 acre feet. And if you're subject to it, you will be notified with that letter. There are two different versions of that letter. If you want to see both versions, even though you didn't get both versions, you can go on the website, you can read a template for each of them. But yes, you will get, if you're subject to enhanced reporting under the order, you will have been informed by this cover letter and initial order that was mailed out on August 20th. If you become subject to enhanced reporting, or if there is a requirement for reporting going forward that is different, that changes, that's why you should subscribe to the LIRIS list or check the website on a frequent basis.
Hey, Melinda, I have to drop off to get to a similar meeting if there's no other questions for me.
I don't see any other.
We don't see any, Kevin.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for your input.
Yeah, and Steve, there's no other questions on the chat. So if last call for questions, I guess.
Very well.
This is Gilbert Coast.
Gilbert?
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just wanted to respond to OSHA's comments. I was part of the group that met with DWR last week to talk about the North Delta barriers. And they are not going to do an EIR if the barriers have to go in next year. But what our plan is to meet with them. I met with Tom Slater and Justin and Topper Van Lobensel's. We're kind of going over what happened in '76 and trying to get them to mitigate some of those impacts before the barriers go in. So we're trying to work as hard as we can to mitigate, even though we know they can't do the full report yet. And the plan is, like they've done with the False River, is to do a CEQA document and have long-term agreements for the barriers. So those are in the process. Hopefully we don't get the barriers in next year and have time to finish up the process. But in the meantime, the farmers are trying to get together with DWR to really show them what the issues are, get those barriers as far downstream as possible. And where we can't get them downstream, make sure they understand what needs to be mitigated. If we have time in the next 5 to 6 months, whenever those barriers have to go in, hopefully we can get siphons extended or pipe pumps extended or something like that. So we're working hard to do that. But yeah, like somebody commented, they're gonna work under the CEQA exemption right now, the emergency exemption. But hopefully we can get some of our input in before they build those things. Thanks.
Thank you, Gilbert, for that clarification. And that group is one of the subcommittees that your board of directors put together to try to get ahead of this a little bit. And so thank you for Tom and Justin for serving on that subcommittee, and Topper for giving them his institutional knowledge. Are there any other questions out there? Hearing none, I would like to thank all the participants in the meeting, especially Michael, Kevin, Gary, Melinda, and all the others that are the experts. And thank you for all the attendees, the laymen, if you will, and my fellow directors. Appreciate it. Appreciate your work, Cindy. Did a great job again. And thank you all. If while I was droning on there, anybody came up with another question, now's your last chance. Hearing no other questions, thank you all very much, and we will adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you.